The land didn't just forget you, it starved you, then froze you, then baked you, until you were just another pile of bones for the coyotes. This was Wyoming territory. 1872, and the wind had been screaming for 3 days. June Talbot felt it in her teeth. The cabin, built by her husband's hands, groaned under the assault. It was late evening, the sky a deep, bruised purple, when she made her last run to the barn to check on the goats. The rain was not a cleansing rain. It was a cold, driving sleet that hit the hard-packed earth with a sound of thrown gravel. She pulled her thick wool shawl tighter, the lantern light swinging wildly, creating frantic, dancing shadows. Her world was this small circle of muddy light. She was about to unlatch the barn door when she saw it. At first, it was just a darker shape against the gray mud, near the half-built stone fence. A log, maybe, or a wolf, dead or sleeping. She raised the lantern. It was a man. He was face down, one arm flung out, his clothes soaked through and clinging to a body that looked too thin. A dark stain, almost black in the dim light, was spreading from his side, pooling in the mud despite the rain's best effort to wash it away. He was unconscious. June stood frozen for a full minute, the wind ripping at her hair. This was trouble. Trouble didn't just knock in this part of the country, it staggered, bleeding, onto your doorstep. The nearest town, if you could call that collection of sod huts and one false-fronted saloon a town, was 20 miles east. The law was a day's ride. She was alone. He wasn't her problem. She could leave him. By morning, the land would have claimed him, and she would be safe. She turned toward the cabin. She took 2 steps. She stopped. She thought of her husband, Jonathan, and the coldness of a world that turned its back. "Damn you," she whispered, "to the man, to the storm, to God." She went back. He was heavier than he looked, a dead weight. She was strong from years of hauling feed and water, but it was a desperate, ugly struggle. She didn't lift, she dragged. His boots carved 2 deep furrows in the mud. She got him inside the cabin, the storm slamming the door shut behind them as if to seal their fate. He lay on her floor, mud and blood and rainwater fouling the clean-swept pine. She stood over him, breathing hard, her heart a frantic bird in her chest. Now what? She barred the door. She lit 2 more lamps, the small cabin glowing with a warm, steady light. She needed to see what she was dealing with. She knelt beside him and, with a grim set to her mouth, began to unbutton his ruined shirt. The wound was in his side, high on the ribs. It was a gunshot wound, clean through, maybe, if he was lucky, but it was ragged, and it had bled a terrible amount. June went to the cedar chest at the foot of her bed. It was Jonathan's. He had been a ranch medic for a time, before they'd tried to make a life on their own. He knew about wounds. The box was full of his supplies, dried herbs, rolled bandages yellowed with time, a small brown bottle of carbolic acid, and another of whiskey. She worked with a grim efficiency. She washed the wound with whiskey, the man groaning and trying to twist away even in his unconsciousness. She held him down with one arm, her weight pressed against his shoulder. "Hold still," she commanded the empty air. She stitched the worst of it with a steady hand, her needle dipping in and out. She poured a little of the carbolic into the remaining whiskey, diluted it with boiled water, and cleaned the wound again. She bandaged him tightly with the old linen. She stripped him of his wet clothes, her hands moving quickly, her eyes averted, though she noted how gaunt he was, ribs like a washboard. She covered him with 2 of her thickest blankets and pushed him closer to the hearth. Only then did she sit. She sat in her rocking chair, her late husband's rifle across her lap, and watched the stranger breathe. He woke 2 days later. The storm had passed, leaving behind a world that was unnervingly bright and quiet. June had been dozing, the rifle never far from her hand. A sudden movement startled her. The man was up on one elbow, his eyes wild with fever and confusion. He saw her, and it was as if he saw a ghost or a threat He didn't speak. He lunged. His hand, calloused and rough, closed around her arm. It was a weak grasp, but it was a man's grasp, and it terrified her. She didn't scream. She didn't flinch. In one smooth motion, she had the rifle off her lap, and the cold steel of the barrel pressed hard against the pulse in his throat. They froze. The only sound was the crackle of the fire and the man's ragged breathing. His eyes, the color of faded denim, stared up at her. He saw the rifle. He saw the grim, still set of her face. He saw that she knew how to use the weapon, and that she would. "Don't," she said, her voice low and steady. It wasn't a plea. It was a fact. His eyes lost their wildness, replaced by a sudden, sharp understanding. The pain of his wound, forgotten in the panic, returned in a white-hot wave. He gasped, his grip on her arm loosening. He fell back against the blankets, his face pale and slick with sweat. June did not lower the rifle. Not for a long time. She watched him. He was breathing hard, his eyes closed, the fight gone out of him. He was just a man again, wounded and weak. Slowly, she lowered the gun. He was no threat, not now. She was wary. She didn't ask him his name, and he didn't offer it. He spent most of the next few days sleeping, a deep, healing sleep. When he was awake, he just watched her. His eyes followed her as she stoked the fire, as she kneaded bread, as she mended her dress. It was an unsettling, quiet gaze, and it made her skin prickle. On the 5th day, she heard hoofbeats. Her heart leapt into her throat. She looked at the man. He had heard it too. He was trying to sit up, his face tight with alarm. "Stay down," she hissed, "and be silent." She grabbed her shawl and stepped onto the porch, pulling the door shut behind her. It was Sheriff Brody. He was a large man who always seemed to be sniffing the air, as if he smelled something foul that no one else could. "Afternoon, Widow Talbot," he said, touching the brim of his hat. He didn't dismount. "Sheriff." "Just making my rounds. Heard you didn't make it into town for supplies last week." "The storm," June said flatly. "I had enough to wait it out." Brody nodded, his eyes scanning the cabin, the barn, the thin line of smoke rising from her chimney. "It's a hard life, out here alone. Still no word from your people back east." "I have no people back east. Sheriff, you know that." He spat a brown stream of tobacco juice onto the dirt. "Thing is, we got word from Laramie. A wanted man, headed north. Might have been shot. He was involved in some trouble at the Bar T Ranch. Horse thieving, maybe worse. You ain't seen anyone unusual passing through, and have you?" June's hands were hidden in the folds of her skirt. She kept them still, though her nails were biting into her palms. "The only unusual thing I've seen, Sheriff, is a 3-legged coyote by the creek. I'm alone out here. You know that, too." Brody stared at her. He knew about her husband. Jonathan? He'd been part of the posse that had brought him in. He'd stood by and watched him hang. He saw her as a tragic, stubborn fool, but he didn't see her as a liar. Not yet. "Well," he said, gathering his reins, "you keep that rifle handy. This man is said to be dangerous." "I always do. Sheriff." He turned his horse and rode away. June didn't move until he was a small, dark speck on the prairie. She went back inside, her legs shaking. The man was lying flat, his eyes fixed on the ceiling. "Eli," he said, his voice a dry rasp. She looked at him. "What?" "My name, it's Eli." She nodded once. "June." The secret was between them now, a living thing in the small, quiet cabin. She kept him hidden, as he healed. She studied him. He was gaunt, as she'd first thought, but it was more than hunger. He was hollowed out, his hands, when he thought she wasn't looking, would tremble. Not from cold, not from weakness, but from something deep inside. He didn't speak much. He answered her questions with a yes or no, or a simple nod. but his eyes were always moving, always watching. He watched her. He watched the door. He watched the fire. He was like a cornered animal, waiting for the trap to spring. Having him there, so quiet and so broken, stirred things in June she had thought were long buried. Her own grief, a constant low hum in the background of her life, resurfaced, sharp and painful. It had been 2 years since they hanged Jonathan. He had been a good man, a quiet man. He knew how to set a bone, how to calm a spooked horse, how to make her laugh. And the town had killed him. They'd accused him of stealing cattle from the big rancher, Hatcher, a man who owned the bank, the saloon, and the sheriff. Jonathan swore he was innocent, that Hatcher was a crook, but it didn't matter. A witness, paid with whiskey and silver, sealed his fate. They hanged him on a bright Tuesday morning, and a part of June had died with him. The town had turned on her then. The good women, the wives of the merchants and the ranchers, they whispered. They said she was cursed. They said she was proud. She had stopped going to town, except for what she absolutely needed. She would work the land. She would survive. This isolation was a shield. But the worst of it, the ache that never, ever subsided, was her son, Thomas. He was 5 when Jonathan died. Jonathan's family, wealthy and cold people from Kansas City, had come. They'd seen her small, struggling homestead. They'd seen the grieving, hardened woman. They'd declared her an unfit mother, the widow of a criminal. They had the money for lawyers. They had the power. They took Thomas. Now, he was 7. He was in Kansas, in a big house, learning to be a gentleman, learning to forget her. June had a small, wooden box under her bed. Inside, tied with a ribbon, was a stack of letters. "My dearest Thomas," they began. She wrote one every few weeks. She told him about the goats. She told him about the hawk that nested in the big cottonwood. She told him that she loved him, that she missed him, that he was her heart. She never sent them. She didn't know the address. And even if she did, she knew they would never let him read them. So she wrote them, and she wept, and she put them in the box. As the days passed, Eli grew stronger. The emptiness in him began to fill. He started sitting up, then walking, limping around the small cabin. One morning, June was outside, struggling to re-nail a shingle on the roof that the storm had torn loose. She was on a wobbly ladder, cursing under her breath. "You'll fall," his voice said. She looked down. He was standing there, his face pale, but his eyes clear. "I can manage," she snapped. "The hammer," he said, holding out a hand. "Give it to me. I'll hold the ladder." She wanted to refuse. She didn't need his help, but her arm was aching, and the shingle was flapping. She sighed and handed him the hammer. "No," he said. "You hold the ladder. I'll go up." He was still weak, his movements slow, but he climbed. He nailed the shingle in 3 clean strokes. He fixed 2 more that she hadn't even seen were loose. He came back down. He didn't say a word, just handed her the hammer and went to sit on the porch, as if the effort had cost him everything. The next day, he took the axe and began to chop firewood. The sound of it, the steady thwack, 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 was a sound she hadn't heard in 2 years. Not since Jonathan. It was a man's sound. When he was done, he had split a week's worth of wood. He stacked it neatly. He did not ask for thanks. June began to soften. She had seen him as a danger, then as a burden. Now, she was beginning to see him as just a man who carried something heavy, something that made his hands shake and his eyes look haunted. He was like her. She started cooking more. She baked bread, the smell of yeast and molasses filling the cabin. She made thick stews with the last of her dried vegetables and the rabbit she'd snared. They ate by the fire, in their usual silence. But the silence had changed. It was no longer empty. It was full. Their quiet routines became charged with an unspoken emotion. The cabin was small. To get to the stove, she had to brush past him as he sat at the small table. The first time, she'd murmured, "Excuse me," and flinched. He had frozen, as if afraid to be touched. Now, they just passed. A brush of her sleeve against his shoulder, the warmth of his body near hers. The air crackled. One evening, she was mending his shirt, the one she had cut from him. He was by the fire, oiling her rifle, his movements economical and precise. She finished her sewing and bit the thread. "It's done," she said. He took it from her. Their fingers touched. A small shock, quick and sharp. He pulled his hand back, and she pulled hers. He looked at the seam, then at her. "Thank you," he said. It was the first time he had thanked her for anything. That night, another windstorm blew in, rattling the windows and howling like a banshee. June couldn't sleep. The house felt small and fragile against the vast, angry darkness. She got up, pulling her quilt around her, and went to the kitchen for a drink of water. She passed his room. It was just an alcove, really separated from the main room by a heavy curtain. As she passed, she heard a sound beneath the shriek of the wind. A whimper, a choked sob. He was crying in his sleep. She froze, her hand on the rough wooden frame. It was not a sound of sadness. It was a sound of pure, abject terror. "No," he whispered, the word torn from him. "I didn't. Please, don't." June stood outside the curtain, trembling. This was a private darkness, a pain so raw it made her own grief feel like a dull ache. She wanted to go in, to wake him, to tell him he was safe. But what right did she have? And was he safe? She backed away, her heart pounding. She left him to his demons and went back to her own bed. But she did not sleep. Eli wasn't always a ghost. He had been a ranch hand on the Bar T, a good job. He was good with horses, quiet, and kept to himself. The boss, Hatcher, had liked him. He'd even trusted him. He'd asked Eli to look over the books one night, said he didn't trust his new foreman. Eli had looked, and what he saw made his blood run cold. Hatcher wasn't just selling his own cattle. He was selling stolen government stock, rebranding them, running them up to the railhead with his own. He was stealing from the army, from the reservations, from everyone. Eli, foolishly, had confronted him. Hatcher had just smiled, poured him a drink, and said he'd take care of it. The next day, 2 of Hatcher's men, cousins with mean eyes, accused Eli of stealing the ranch payroll. They said they'd seen him. They said he'd been planning it for weeks. Eli knew that look. He knew what came next. He didn't even go back for his bedroll. He took the best horse in the corral and he ran. He was a fool. He should have taken a different horse. This one was Hatcher's favorite. It made him a horse thief, a hanging offense. They'd caught up to him 2 days later. The shot had come from a ridge. It burned through his side, hot and sharp, knocking him from the saddle. He'd crawled into a gully, the horse running off, and he'd hidden. He'd heard them, cursing and hunting for him, but he'd stayed still, bleeding into the dirt, until nightfall. Then he'd walked, and he'd run, and he'd walked, until he'd seen the light of a small cabin in a storm. And then, nothing, until he'd woken up with a rifle at his throat. The space between them, which had been measured in suspicion and fear, began to shrink. It was not a sudden change, but a slow, quiet thaw, like the creek in late spring. June found herself making more food than was needed. She baked a small loaf of molasses bread, telling herself it was just to use up the last of the jar. She made a stew thick with dried beans and smoked goat meat, and when Eli ate 2 full bowls, a strange, quiet satisfaction settled in her. Eli, in turn, began to use his voice. It was a low, rough thing, rusty from disuse. It started with small words. "Water's low," he'd say, and before she could reply, he'd be on his way to the well, the buckets heavy in his hands. Then, "That fence post is loose," and he'd spend an hour tamping the earth, his movement still stiff but measured and capable. The silence on the porch became a habit. In the long, cool evenings, after the chores were done and the sun was a bleeding smear of orange and purple, they would sit, she in a rocking chair, mending a pair of his socks, he on the top step, his back to the post, whittling a piece of cottonwood. He wasn't very good at it, but his hands needed to be busy. They would sit for an hour, sometimes more, and say nothing at all. They just watched the hawks circle in the high, clear air, two specks of darkness against an endless blue. It was a truce. The cabin was too small for distance, and the land outside too big for a single soul to bear. One afternoon, the truce was broken by laughter. June's mule, Silas, was a creature of pure, malicious stubbornness. He had gotten it into his head that the patch of clover on the other side of the creek was his destiny, and the rickety fence June had built was a mere suggestion. He was out, and June was chasing him. "Get back here, you flea-bitten son of a goat!" she yelled, her skirts hiked up, her face red. The mule just flicked his ears and trotted, always keeping a perfect 10 yards between them. Eli came out of the barn, a piece of harness in his hand. He watched her for a moment. A small, almost imperceptible twitch played at the corner of his mouth. "He likes to be cornered," Eli called out. "He likes to be a fool," she retorted, lunging for the trailing rope and missing. "He'll end up in the mud." "Then we'll go in the mud," Eli said. He didn't run at the mule. He just walked, a slow, deliberate circle, cutting off the mule's path to the wider prairie. He was moving him, gently, back toward the creek bed. Silas, seeing his options narrow, made a final, desperate dash. He bolted straight into the one thing he was trying to avoid, the soft, sucking mud at the creek's edge. He sank to his knees and brayed, a sound of profound indignation. June put her hands on her hips. "Well, now you've done it." Eli just looked at the mule. "Yep." It took them half an hour. They pushed, they pulled. They got a rope under the mule's belly. The animal, sensing their frustration, leaned back, making himself a dead weight. Eli, his face set, put his shoulder to the mule's hindquarters and shoved. Silas, in a panic, lurched forward. Eli lost his footing. He went down. He fell face first into the cold, gray mud. There was a moment of perfect, stunned silence. Eli stayed right where he was, as if considering just staying there forever. June looked at him, the man who watched the hawks, the man who cried in his sleep. He was covered, head to toe, in a thick paste of mud and creek water. His hat was floating nearby. A sound bubbled up in her throat. It was foreign, a painful, rusty sound. It was a laugh. She put a hand to her mouth, as if to trap it, but it escaped. It was a full, clear, genuine laugh. Eli turned his head, spitting out a stream of grit. He looked at her. Her face was bright, her eyes crinkled. He had never heard her make a sound like that. He had never seen her look like that. Then he saw his own hand, covered in the gray slime. He saw the mule, now standing on firm ground, looking at them both with serene disinterest. A slow smile spread across his own face. It was not a laugh, not yet, but it was the promise of one. He chuckled, a low, rasping sound. "Well," he said, pushing himself up on one elbow, "I reckon he's cornered." June laughed again, harder this time, the sound echoing in the small valley. She walked over and offered him a hand. He took it. Their hands, caked in mud, slipped, and she stumbled forward, landing on her knees beside him. Now they were both muddy. They just knelt there, looking at each other, grinning like fools. It was the first time in 2 years June had laughed. It was the first time in longer than he could remember that Eli had felt anything close to joy. Later, the air in the cabin was different. The shared laughter, the shared mud, had changed something. The tension was still there, but it was no longer the tension of fear. It was something else. That evening, June heated a large pot of water on the stove. It was her night to bathe. She hung the thick horse blanket over a rope, sectioning off the area by the fireplace, creating a small, private space. "I'm going to be a while," she said, her back to him. Eli was on his cot in the alcove, pretending to be asleep. "All right," he murmured into his thin pillow. He was not asleep. He was achingly, terribly awake. The cabin was small, the blanket a poor barrier. He lay facing the wall, his eyes squeezed shut, but his other senses were on fire. He heard the water pour into the metal tub, a heavy, splashing sound. He heard the rustle of her clothes as they fell to the floor. He heard the small, sharp intake of her breath as she stepped into the hot water. Then, the sounds of washing, the dip and rub of a cloth, a small, quiet sigh. Eli's heart was pounding. He could smell the lye soap, a clean, sharp scent that cut through the usual cabin smells of wood smoke and bacon fat. He could picture her hair, which she always kept pinned in a tight, severe bun, would be down. He'd seen it loose once, when the wind had caught it. It was the color of dark honey. He felt a deep, profound shame. This woman had saved his life. She had stitched his wound. She had lied to the law for him. And here he was, in her house, thinking thoughts that a man like him had no right to think. He was trouble. He was a fugitive. He was unclean. He clutched the thin blanket in his fist, his knuckles white. He forced himself to think of the trail, of the cold, of the men hunting him. He forced himself to be the man he was, not the man who was listening to a woman bathe just 10 feet away. He turned his face harder into the wall, as if he could press the thoughts from his mind. Later, when the cabin was still and dark, he thought she was asleep. His wound was itching, the new skin pulling tight. He sat up, wincing, and swung his legs off the cot. He needed to change the bandage. He went to the main room, moving silently. The fire had burned down to glowing embers, casting a low, red light. He sat on the small stool, his back to the hearth, and pulled his shirt off over his head. He was unwrapping the linen from his side when he heard her voice. "Is it bleeding?" He froze. June was standing by her bed, a quilt wrapped around her. She was not asleep. "No," he said, his voice rough. "It just itches." He kept his back to her, feeling exposed, vulnerable. "Let me see." It was not a request. She came toward him, lighting a lamp as she passed the table, the cabin filled with a soft, yellow glow. She stood in front of him. He didn't move. He sat there, shirtless, in the lamplight. June's breath caught in her throat. She had seen his gaunt frame when she'd first tended him, but now, healed and with more food in his belly. She saw him. His shoulders were broad. His skin, in the warm light, was stretched taut over a frame that was lean and hard. And she saw the scars. The gunshot wound on his side was a puckered, angry red, but it was healing. It was the other marks that held her gaze. A long, thin, white line that ran from his left shoulder down to his ribs. The clear mark of a knife. A patch of rough, raised skin on his forearm, as if from a bad burn, and across his back, though he tried to angle away. She saw the faint, overlapping, silvery lines, old scars, many of them. This was a man who had lived a hard, violent life. This was the history written on his skin. He saw her looking. He saw the pity or the shock in her eyes, and he couldn't bear it. He reached for his shirt to cover himself. "Don't," she whispered. Her voice was thick. He stopped, his hand hovering. Their eyes met. It was the first time. The mule, the mud, that was laughter. This was different. This was raw. Neither of them spoke. The air in the cabin was so thick, so heavy. It was hard to breathe. He was not just a fugitive. She was not just a widow. They were a man and a woman, standing in the lamplight. And the quiet routines were gone. replaced by this sudden, palpable charge. He saw the loneliness in her eyes. She saw the pain in his. He was the one to break the gaze. He looked away, back at the fire. "It's fine. I can manage." June stood there for another long moment. Then, she nodded once, her movements stiff. "Get some sleep. Eli, you're still healing." She went back to her bed, but neither of them slept. The outside world returned a week later, in the form of a traveling peddler named Silas Croft. He was a small, chirpy man with a wagon full of needles, tin pots, and gossip. June saw him coming from a mile off. "Get in the barn," she said to Eli, her voice tight. "And don't make a sound." Eli vanished. June met Croft on the porch, forcing a thin smile. "Widow Talbot," he chirped, sweeping a dusty hat from his head. "A pleasure, as always. You look, well. Mr. Croft, what do you have?" "Ribbons from St. Louis. The latest patent medicines. And news, my dear. Plenty of news." She bought a spool of black thread and a small bag of salt, which cost her dearly. As he was packing her things, he leaned in, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. "You'll want to be careful, ma'am. All alone out here." "I'm always careful." "No, this is different. The talk in town. Well, Sheriff Brody was in the saloon. He's still looking for that fellow from the Bar T. The one Hatcher says is a killer." June's blood went cold. "I don't listen to town gossip." "This ain't just gossip," Croft insisted, warming to his topic. "They say he's still in the territory, hiding up in the hills. Some folks say they've seen smoke from fires where no fires ought to be. A rough cowboy, hiding out. Brody says he's armed and dangerous." June stared at him, her face a hard mask. "I have work to do. Mr. Croft, I've seen no one. Now, if you'll excuse me." Her coldness shut him down. He muttered, "Of course, ma'am," and hurried back to his wagon. June watched him go, her hands trembling. When Eli came back inside, the cabin felt cold. The warmth of the past weeks had vanished. "I heard," Eli said. He was standing by the door, his jaw tight. "He's a fool. He just likes to talk." "He's not wrong," Eli said. He wouldn't look at her. He walked to the fireplace and stared into the flames. "A rough cowboy, armed and dangerous. That's me." "Eli." "He's right. I'm putting you in danger. Brody, he'll be back. Hatcher's men. They won't stop." He turned to her. His eyes were the same faded denim color, but the haunted look was back, stronger than ever. "I'm trouble. June. That's all I am. I'm healed enough. I'm leaving. I'll go tonight." June's heart stopped. She had known this was coming. She had dreaded it. She had pushed the thought away. Now, here it was. He was leaving. He was going to walk out into the prairie and vanish, and she would be alone again. The silence, which had become a comfort, would turn back into a weapon. She wanted to scream. She wanted to beg. She wanted to tell him that she didn't care about Brody or Hatcher or the gossip. But she didn't. She was Jonathan's widow. She was Thomas's mother. She was a woman who had learned to swallow her pain. She just grew quieter. She nodded, a small, jerky motion. "If that's what you think is best." She turned away from him and began, with frantic, jerky movements, to scrub the cast-iron pot from dinner, as if it were the most important task in the world. The crisis came just after dusk. The air was still. A heavy, oppressive stillness that promised violence. It came not from men, but from the land itself. A sound ripped the night open. It was not a howl. It was a scream. A high, thin, terrified bleating. The goats. June dropped the dish rag, grabbing the rifle from its pegs by the door. "Stay inside," she commanded Eli. But he was already moving, his face grim. He'd been packing a small satchel. He dropped it. "That's not one. That's a pack." They burst out the door together. In the twilight, they were just shadows. A pack of wild dogs, ribs showing, eyes glowing a faint green in the gloom, had surrounded the small goat pen. They had torn a board loose. One of them, a big dark brute, had a kid by the throat, shaking it. "No," June breathed. It was Lily, her best milker's new baby. She raised the rifle, but the dogs were moving too fast, a frantic, snarling mass. "Give it to me," Eli said, his voice a low command. He took the rifle from her. He was still weak. His hands, she knew, still shook. But as he raised the gun, he became utterly still. He was a different man. The gaunt, quiet man was gone, replaced by the dangerous cowboy the peddler had described. He didn't aim for the big one. He aimed for the one trying to get at the others. The shot was deafening in the small valley. It echoed, a sharp crack against the hills. One of the dogs yelped, spun in a circle, and fell. The others, startled by the noise and the sudden, human scent, scattered, vanishing back into the shadows. The silence that fell was terrible. The kid was lying still. Eli lowered the rifle. He leaned heavily against the fence post, his breathing ragged. The shot, the sudden burst of action, had cost him. "Eli?" June said, moving toward him. He looked at her, his face pale and slick with sweat in the dying light. "I'm fine." He was not fine. The effort, the strain, had been too much. He had torn his wound open again. A dark stain was spreading on his shirt. He looked down at it, a grimace of self-disgust on his face. He pushed himself off the fence, tried to take a step, and his legs, weak from fever and pain, buckled. He collapsed. She dragged him back inside. He was a dead weight, mumbling curses at himself. "Stupid! Stupid!" She got him onto the cot in the alcove, her heart a frantic drum. She lit the lamp, her hands shaking so badly she could barely strike the match. The wound was bleeding again, a sluggish, dark seep. He had ripped the stitches she'd so carefully sewn. She went to work, her face grim. She cleaned him, her hands gentle but firm. He was hot, a fever already taking hold. "I'm sorry," he whispered, his eyes squeezed shut. "I'm sorry, June." "Be quiet," she ordered, her voice sharp. "You're a fool, an absolute fool." She finished bandaging him. He was shivering now, the adrenaline gone, leaving only the cold and the pain. He tried to sit up. I gotta go," he mumbled, his voice thick with fever. "See, I'm trouble. I bring it, right to your door." June put her hand on his chest, pushing him back down. "You're not going anywhere. You're not healed." Her voice was low, trembling with a force he had never heard. It was anger. It was fear. It was something else. "Doesn't matter," he insisted, his hand closing over her wrist. He was weak, but his grip was tight. "I'm leaving. I won't be the man who brings them to you." He tried again, pushing himself up on one elbow. He was going to leave. He was going to walk out into the night and die. And he thought it was a noble gesture. She saw it all in that one stupid, stubborn movement. The self-hatred, the guilt, the deep, aching belief that he was worthless. She couldn't let him. She wouldn't. She didn't think. She acted. She pushed him back, hard, and when he tried to rise a third time, she moved, straddling him, her knees on either side of his hips, pinning his legs to the cot. She wasn't heavy, but her weight was a surprise, a shock that sent him falling back against the pillow. He froze. His eyes snapped open, wide. The fever, the pain, was gone, replaced by pure, stunned disbelief. A woman, this woman, was on top of him. She was leaning over him, her face close to his. Her hair, which had come loose in the struggle, fell forward, a dark curtain that framed her face. She was breathing hard. her chest rising and falling. She looked half playful, like a woman scolding a foolish child, and half desperate, like a person clinging to a cliff edge. "You," she said, her voice a low growl, "are not going anywhere." He just stared up at her. He could feel the warmth of her body, the press of her legs. He could smell the soap on her skin and the faint wood smoke scent of her hair. His heart, which had been pounding from the fever, now pounded for a different reason. She saw his look, she felt his stillness, and she suddenly, terribly, realized what she had done, the intimacy of it, the strangeness. She was straddling a man in her bed, a man who was not her husband. Her own heart slammed against her ribs. She was close enough to see the small flecks of gray in his blue eyes. She could feel his breath on her face. She didn't know what she wanted. She wanted him to stop being a fool. She wanted him to be safe. She wanted him to stay. She leaned closer, her gaze locked on his. The world shrank to the few inches between their faces. Then she pulled back, just an inch, her own shame flooding her. What was she doing? She was the widow of a hanged man. She was a mother. "Why?" he whispered. His voice was hoarse. "Why do you care? I'm nothing." That broke her, the last of her control. She looked him dead in the eye, and all the loneliness, all the grief, all the quiet, aching want of the last 2 years poured out of her. "You think no one wants you," she whispered, her voice fierce, trembling. "You think you're just trouble, or a ghost, or something to be thrown away." She leaned in again, her lips almost brushing his. "But I do." The words hung in the dark, silent cabin. "I do. A confession, a promise, a claim." She stayed there for a long second, then got off him, her movements quick and awkward. She turned away, pulling her shawl tight around her, her back to him. "Rest," she said, her voice choked. "You'll be no good to anyone dead." Hours passed. The cabin was silent, save for the ticking of the small clock and the crackle of the dying embers. Eli lay awake, his wound throbbing, his mind reeling. "But I do." The fever was still on him, but her words burned hotter. He heard a sound, a bare foot on the pine floor. He turned his head. June was standing by his cot. He couldn't see her face in the dark, only her silhouette against the red glow of the fire. She stood there for a full minute, as if in a trance. He thought she was going to check his bandage. He thought she was going to tell him to leave. She didn't say a word. She just lifted the edge of his blanket. He tensed. He didn't understand. She slipped in beside him. He went utterly still. She was fully clothed, her dress, her shawl, everything. She was cold, and he could feel her trembling. Or maybe he was the one trembling. She lay on her back, stiff as a board, not touching him. They lay side by side, 2 bodies in the small, narrow cot, staring up at the dark ceiling. Then, slowly, as if it took every last ounce of her courage, she moved her hand. She didn't try to hold his. She just laid her palm over the back of his hand, a small, warm weight, an anchor. They lay there for a long time, fully clothed, in the dark. No words, just her hand, resting over his. The morning after, the air in the cabin was different. It was still, but not with the stillness of suspicion. It was the quiet of a decision made. When June woke, she was stiff. Eli was already gone from the cot. She heard the soft scrape of the coffee grinder. She sat up, her heart a heavy stone. She had been a fool. She had acted out of loneliness. And now she had broken the fragile truce. She had shown him her weakness. She came out from her bed, her hair unkempt, her face pale in the thin morning light. He was at the hearth, his back to her, pouring hot water into the pot. He did not turn, but he knew she was there. "It's cold," he said, his voice low. "The fire almost went out." He hadn't mentioned the cot. He hadn't mentioned her hand, or the long, silent hours they lay side by side. He was giving her the chance to pretend it had not happened. June looked at the man who had shot a dog to save her goats, the man who cried in his sleep. She thought of her husband's grave and the cold, empty bed she had slept in for 2 years. She was tired of pretending. She walked to the hearth, picked up her mug, and held it out. He poured the coffee. Their hands were steady. "Thank you," she said. He finally looked at her. His eyes, the color of a winter sky, were searching. He saw no regret in her face, only a deep, weary resolve. She did not pull away. She did not blush. She just met his gaze. And the barrier, the one made of fear and grief and the ghosts of their pasts, did not so much break as it dissolved, like sugar in hot coffee. It was done. He was no longer a secret. He was a fact. From that day, the cabin became a shared space. It was not always spoken, but it was clear in every gesture. She began to cook for him, not just to feed him. She made biscuits. She took the time to stew the dried apples with cinnamon. He, in turn, began to own the space. He fixed the wobbly leg on the table. He took over the wood chopping, stacking the cords high and neat. The change was most clear in her. A woman who had lived with her shoulders hunched against the world's judgment now stood straighter. There was a quiet possessiveness in how she looked at him. When he limped from working too long, she would say, "Your side is hurting you. Sit." And it was an order, but it was an order born of care. She loved him. It was as simple and as dangerous as that. The land, however, did not care about their fragile new peace. The spring, which had started with such violent storms, now turned against them. The rain stopped. It did not just stop, it vanished. The sky became a hard, white, glaring thing. The creek, which fed her small vegetable garden, shrank. The water level dropped, leaving banks of cracked, gray mud. Drought. It was a word that meant death in this territory. June looked at her wilting corn, the leaves curling in on themselves, and felt the old, familiar panic. This garden was not for pleasure, it was for survival. It was the food that would get her through the next winter. Without it, she would be forced to go to town, to beg for credit she would not get. Eli found her by the creek bed, staring at the sluggish, shallow stream. She was holding a bucket, her knuckles white. "It won't be enough," she said, her voice flat. "I can't carry enough." Eli didn't look at the bucket. He looked at the land. He scanned the slope of the hill, the way the creek bed curved, the patch of land her garden was on. He was quiet for a long time. "No," he said at last. "You can't, not like that." He went to the barn, found the digging spade and the pickaxe. "Down in Texas," he said, his voice distant, as if remembering a different life. "We had land like this, flat, dry. We learned to trick the water." For 3 days, they worked. He insisted. He was not just helping, he was taking charge. He taught her. He showed her how to use the slope of the land. They dug a trench, not deep, but long, starting farther up the creek, at a place where the water still pooled. He showed her how to create a gentle, almost imperceptible downhill grade. "It's not about speed," he explained. His shirt soaked with sweat, his face caked in dust. "It's about patience. You just give it a path. You invite it. Water is lazy. It will always take the easiest way." They worked side by side. It was hard, grueling work. The ground was like rock, but it was shared work. They moved as a team. She would loosen the earth with the pickaxe. He would come behind her with the spade. They drank from the same canteen, their hands brushing. They did not talk much. They just worked. On the 3rd afternoon, he broke through the last barrier of hard-packed earth. A small, dark tongue of water, no thicker than his thumb, licked its way into the new channel. It hesitated, then flowed. It followed the path they had carved, all the way down the slope, until it spilled, in a muddy, life-giving trickle, right into the top row of her corn. June watched it, her hand at her throat. She hadn't realized she was holding her breath. "It's not much," Eli said, wiping his forehead with a dirty arm. "It's everything," June whispered. They stood there, two figures covered in dirt and sweat, and watched the water run. He had saved her, not with a gun, but with patience and knowledge and sweat. He had brought life back to her land. That night, the cot in the alcove stayed empty. It wasn't a decision, not a spoken one. It was just a fact. After they had washed the dirt from their faces, after they had eaten a silent, exhausted meal, he did not move toward the alcove. He sat by the fire. June banked the embers, and when she was done, she turned and looked at him. He was waiting. She walked to her bed, pulled back the quilt, and got in. She left space. He stood, unlaced his boots, and laid his gun belt on the table. He walked over and lay down, on top of the quilt, his back to her. The bed was a new world. The cot had been a truce. This was a surrender. Their connection, forged in silence and shared labor, now deepened in the dark. The first night, they did not touch. They just lay stiffly, breathing in the same small space. The next night, his foot brushed hers, and neither of them moved away. The third night, he came to bed, and she was already there, on her side. He lay down, and this time, he faced her. They were inches apart. "Your side," she whispered, her voice barely a sound. "Did you hurt it today?" "It's fine," he whispered back. "You're a poor liar." "I'm learning." A small smile touched her lips. His hand, calloused and rough, moved across the quilt. He found hers. He laced his fingers through hers. They fell asleep like that. The whispers began. In the dark, secrets that could not survive the hard light of day came out. He told her about the bar tea. Not all of it, not about Hatcher, but about the running, about the cold, about the fear. She told him about Thomas, about the color of his hair, about the way he laughed, about the letters in the box under the bed. Kisses, when they came, were reluctant. A brush of his lips against her hair as he left the bed in the morning. Her hand, touching his cheek for just a second as she handed him a plate. They were fragile, tentative things, as if a real kiss would shatter them both. Then one night, he woke from a nightmare, gasping, his body rigid. He was back in the gully, the men hunting him, the blood cooling on his side. June was there. She didn't try to wake him. She just held him. She put her arms around him and held him tight, as if she could physically keep the ghosts at bay. He came back to himself, breathing her name, his face buried in her neck. He was shaking. "I've got you," she whispered. "I'm here." He pulled back, his eyes wild in the moonlight. He looked at her, this woman who had dragged him from the mud, who had lied for him, who had held him. He saw her, the strength in her, the loneliness in her. He kissed her. It was not gentle. It was not reluctant. It was a kiss of desperation, a drowning man's grasp for air. It was heated and raw and full of all the words they could not say. It was a kiss that said, "I am here, and you are real." He kissed her until they were both breathless, his hand tangled in her hair, her hands clutching his shoulders. And then, just as quickly, he stopped. He pulled away, his breath ragged. He looked at her, his face a mask of shame and fear. "I'm sorry," he whispered, and turned his back to her, rigid and cold, leaving her trembling and aching in the dark. A week later, he found her staring at the fire, her hands in her lap, her face pale. She had been quiet all day, ever since she'd gotten back from her supply run. "June?" She didn't look at him. "In town," she said, her voice thin. "After I left the store, Mrs. Brody, she saw me. She said I should be ashamed. She said, they all know." Eli was very still. "Know what?" June finally looked at him. There were no tears. Her eyes were just dry and dead. That I'm a whore, that's what they called me. After Jonathan died. And I wouldn't leave. Hatcher offered to buy this land for 10 cents on the dollar. I told him to go to hell. So he told the town I was available, that I'd stay to take in men. Eli's hand tightened into a fist at his side. I stopped going to town, except when I had to, June continued, her voice a monotone. I told myself I didn't care. What did their words matter? They were just wind. I stopped caring. Eli, I really did. I stopped caring about anything. He knelt in front of her. He put his hands on her knees. Look at me. She did. I'm sorry, he said, his voice rough, for bringing this on you. You didn't, she said, a small, sad smile touching her lips. They hated me long before you got here. You're just a better reason. He saw the pain and the shame and the defiance, all warring in her. He had to tell her. He had to make her see that he was the one who was unclean. I killed a man once, he said, his voice low. Her breath hitched. She looked at him. It wasn't like they say. It wasn't for money. It was a long time ago. Before the bar tea, I was in a saloon. A man. He was drunk. He pulled a knife. It was me or him. He looked down at his hands, the ones that had fixed her roof and dug her trench. I was faster. I killed him, and I ran. I've been running ever since. That's who I am. June, I'm a killer, and I'm a thief. She stared at him. She saw the confession in his eyes, the self-hatred he carried like a second skin. He had given her his worst truth. She reached out and laid her hand on his cheek. His skin was rough with stubble. You survived, she said, her voice quiet. That's all. You survived. Just like me. The letter arrived 2 days later. The post rider, a young man who looked half-starved, rarely came this far out. He handed June the envelope, touched his hat, and rode off, eager to get back to civilization. June knew the handwriting. It was her sister-in-law, Jonathan's sister. Her hands trembled as she broke the wax seal. Eli was in the barn. She was alone. She read it. It was not a letter. It was a threat, wrapped in the cold, precise language of the law. They had heard disturbing reports of her reclusive and unstable behavior. They had been informed that her land, which they still considered their brother's, was falling into ruin, that she was entertaining men of low character. They were concerned, for her and for the family name. And then the blade. They were petitioning the territorial court to grant them custody of the land. As Jonathan's only remaining family, they would, of course, provide her a generous sum. Or she could come to her senses, return to Kansas City with them, and live respectably. They even threatened that if she refused, they would file a motion to have her declared unfit, and she would forfeit any right to ever see her son again. June read the letter 3 times. The world went silent. The cabin, which had become a sanctuary, now felt like a trap. They were going to take her land. They were going to use Thomas to do it. She heard Eli at the door, stomping the dust from his boots. She folded the letter, her movements quick and frantic. She shoved it deep into the pocket of her apron. Just as he walked in, that post rider was in a hurry, he said, heading for the water barrel. He smiled at her. It was a small, new, fragile thing, that smile of his. June forced her own lips to move. He's always in a hurry. Eli drank, then looked at her. The smile faded. He saw her face. He saw the color was gone, the light in her eyes extinguished. She looked just as she had when he first woke up, a woman braced for a blow. June, what is it? What did the letter say? She couldn't tell him. This was her fight. It was about Jonathan. It was about Thomas. It was about her shame. If she told him, he would see her as they did, unstable, unfit, a burden. He was a man running from the law. He couldn't fight lawyers. And a small, cold voice whispered, if he knew, he would leave. He was trouble. He wouldn't want to be part of hers. It was nothing, she said, turning away, her voice too bright. Just my cousin from back east. Her child is sick. She lied. It was a clumsy, stupid lie. Eli knew it. He saw the way her hand kept going to her apron pocket. He saw the stiffness in her back. He saw the panic. He was a man who knew secrets. He knew the look of one. He wanted to press her. He wanted to shake her and demand the truth. But he had no right. He was a man in her bed, but he was not her husband. He was a guest, a refugee. He saw the wall go up, the one she had lived behind for 2 years. And he, more than anyone, knew what it meant to need to keep your troubles to yourself. He didn't push. He just nodded, his own face growing colder, the new warmth between them chilling. I'll be in the barn. The mule. He's thrown a shoe. He left. The silence he left behind was heavy and full of the unsaid. The distance was still there 2 days later when she went on her supply run. Eli had offered to go. No, she'd said, too sharply. It's my business. I can't be seen with you. It's safer. It was an excuse. She needed to be alone. She needed to think. The letter was a fire in her pocket. The town was just as she'd left it, dusty, mean, and full of eyes. She went to the general store, her list in hand, salt, flour, coffee, lard. Mr. Henderson, the owner, measured out her supplies, his face impassive. But she saw the other women, 2 of them, Mrs. Brody and Mrs. Hatcher herself, standing by the bolts of calico. They stopped talking when she walked in. They just watched her, whispering. June kept her head down. She paid for her things, her movements jerky. She just wanted to leave. She walked out onto the boardwalk, her bag heavy. That's her, a voice said, a man's voice, slurred. She turned. 2 of Hatcher's ranch hands were leaning against the saloon rail. She recognized them. They had been at Jonathan's trial. That's the widow Talbot, one said, a mean grin on his face. Heard she ain't so lonely anymore. Heard she likes the rough ones, the other said. Stepping into her path, he was big, and he smelled of sweat and stale whiskey. Heard she's shacking up with a killer. That right, June? You finally find a man who can handle you? June tried to step around him. Excuse me? The man blocked her again. What's the hurry? We're just being neighborly. He looked at her, his eyes raking her up and down. He saw the worn dress, the anger in her face. And then he did it. He spat. It wasn't at her, it was near her, a thick brown stream of tobacco juice that landed on the hem of her skirt. A mark, a stain, a judgment. June froze. The world stopped. The sound of the wind, the rattle of a passing wagon, the laughter from the saloon. It all went away. All she could see was the dark stain on her dress, the dress she had mended 3 times. She didn't say a word. She didn't look at him. She just turned, walked to her wagon, and drove away. She did not run. She did not cry. She just left. The ride home was 20 miles. She drove the mule, her back straight, her eyes fixed on the horizon. She did not cry. She got to the cabin. Eli was outside, splitting the last of the wood. The sound a steady, rhythmic comfort. He saw the wagon, put the axe down, and walked over. He was smiling, that small, fragile smile. You made good time. He stopped. He saw her face. It was white. It was stone. June, what happened? He saw the stain on her dress. His smile vanished. His face went dark. Who? He said, his voice a low growl. Who did this? She stepped down from the wagon. She tried to walk past him, into the cabin. "It's nothing. It's just mud." "That ain't mud." He grabbed her arm. Not hard, but firm. "June, tell me." She looked at him. She saw the rage in his eyes, the protective, violent anger. And she saw, beyond it, the man who was wanted, the man who was running. If he went to town, he'd be hanged. And the stone wall inside her, the one she had built to survive the town, her in-laws, her grief, it broke. She broke. It started as a small, choked sound, a single tear, and then it was a storm. She fell against him, her fists clutching his shirt, and she sobbed. She wept. She cried for Jonathan. She cried for Thomas. She cried for the letter in her pocket and the stain on her dress. She cried for the 2 years of loneliness, and the one moment of hope that she knew was about to be extinguished. Eli was frozen for a second. He was a man of violence and running. He was not a man of comfort, but this was June. He put his arms around her. He pulled her tight, his hand going to the back of her head, pressing her face into his shoulder. He just held her. He let her cry. He let the storm break. "It's all right," he whispered, his voice rough. "I'm here. It's all right." He held her for a long time. While the sun dipped low and the air grew cold, her sobs quieted, turning into ragged, exhausted breaths. She was so heavy in his arms, so small. He felt a rage so pure, so cold. It almost choked him. He wanted to ride to town. He wanted to find the man who had done this. He wanted to kill him. But he stayed. He held her. He felt her shiver. He led her inside, sat her on the stool by the fire. He built it up, the flames leaping high. He knelt in front of her. Her face was swollen, her eyes red. He gently, his rough fingers clumsy, unpinned her hair. It fell, dark and heavy, around her shoulders. He stroked it. He didn't know what else to do. She looked at him, her eyes still swimming. They hate me," she whispered. "They're fools," he said, his voice thick. They called you a killer." "I am," he said, "but not for the reasons they think." He held her face in his hands. He looked at her, this woman who the world had tried so hard to break, this woman who had saved him. He kissed her neck, a soft, gentle kiss in the hollow of her throat. He kissed the tear track on her cheek. You're the only clean thing," he whispered, his own voice breaking. "The only clean thing I've ever touched." She looked at him. His confession, his truth. He, the killer, the fugitive, thought she was clean. The air in the room changed. The grief was still there. The anger was still there. But something else, something that had been building since she'd laid her hand on his, something that had been in his desperate kiss, was there, too. It was need. It was a desperate, aching human need to be seen, to be held, to be real. He leaned in. He kissed her on the lips. It was not a kiss of passion, not yet. It was a kiss of salt and tears and wood smoke. It was a kiss of comfort. It was a kiss of promise. She kissed him back. The kiss deepened. It became the kiss from the dark, the one he had pulled away from. But now, there was no pulling away. This was not a decision. It was a fire. It was a flood. It was the only thing in the world that made sense. His hands were in her hair. Her hands were on his face. He pulled her from the stool, down onto the bearskin rug in front of the fire, the one that had been her husband's. It was vulnerable. She was scared. He was terrified. He was stained. She was ruined. It was intense. It was a claiming. His mouth on her, his hands on her body, learning her, not with gentleness, but with a desperate, knowing reverence. Her hands on him, pulling him closer, clutching his shirt, as if he were the only solid thing in a world that was falling apart. They were two broken people, clinging to each other, trying to make a whole. It was not love as she had known it, soft and easy. It was raw, and it was painful, and it was desperate. It was two people in a brutal world, holding on to the only thing that felt real. The act of love, in a world that had given them none, changed the air. It did not make it easier. It made it more dangerous. The cabin was no longer a sanctuary for two wounded animals. It was a fortress for two people who had chosen a side, and the world, it seemed, was on the other. They began to prepare, not with words, but with a silent, shared understanding. Winter was coming, and so, they felt, was something else. The drought had broken, only to be replaced by furious, early autumn storms that battered the small cabin. And with the storms came the rumors, carried on the wind from town. Whispers of the widow and her killer. They were a unit now. Eli, his side healed into a dull ache, worked from sunup to sundown. He was mending fences, his movements precise, as if lashing the small property together against an invasion. June, in a move that felt like cutting off a limb, sold 2 of her 3 goats, the ones she had raised from kids. She took them to a small, neighboring homestead 5 miles south, run by a reclusive old man who asked no questions. She traded them for 200 pounds of flour and a side of cured bacon. "We'll need the feed for the mule," she explained to Eli, her voice flat, but they both knew. It was one less thing to protect, one less reason to be tied down. They rationed. Coffee, a luxury, was cut down to a single, weak cup in the morning. They ate bean stew and the last of the garden's stringy carrots. They were battening down the hatches. The air between them was charged with this unspoken preparation. They worked, they ate, they slept, all with a quiet, grim determination. They were in this together, but the secrets they still kept lay between them in the dark. Eli had not forgotten the letter. He saw her, at night, when she thought he was asleep, staring at the ceiling. He knew she was in some kind of trouble, a trouble she would not name. And he, in turn, had a secret he was nursing. He had seen a rider. It was 3 days after June's trip to town, the day she had broken down. He had been on the small rise behind the barn, checking a rabbit snare, when he saw it, a glint of light on the far western ridge. Not a signal. Just the sun, hitting metal, a spyglass, maybe, or the barrel of a rifle. He'd stayed frozen, blending into the tall grass. A man on a horse, a black speck, was sitting, watching the valley, watching the cabin. He was too far to see features, but he was not a traveler. A traveler moves. This man was watching. Eli had stayed there until the man finally turned and disappeared back over the ridge. He had wanted to run. His first instinct, honed by years, was to grab his satchel and disappear. He knew that shape. He knew that patience. That was a hunter. But he had looked down at the cabin, at the thin spiral of smoke rising, and he had thought of June. He could not run, not yet. He didn't tell her. He just became quieter. His eyes were never still. He was always scanning the ridges, his rifle never more than a foot from his hand. He took to sitting on the porch in the dark, long after she had gone to bed, just listening. The quiet, watchful man she had first met had returned, but now his watchfulness had a new, sharp edge. June felt the change. She mistook it for his anger at the town, his worry over the coming winter. She would find him on the porch, and she would bring him a blanket, her hand resting on his shoulder for a moment. He would cover her hand with his, and his skin would be ice cold. The stranger came a week later, on a Tuesday. The wind was high, a cold, whining sound that set June's teeth on edge. Eli was in the barn, sharpening the axe. June was kneading bread. A man on a mule, not a horse, came up the path. He was not a cowboy. He wore a dusty, dark suit and a bowler hat. He looked like a preacher or a failed merchant. He smiled, a wide, wet smile that didn't touch his cold, pale eyes. "Afternoon," "Ma'am," he said, touching the brim of his hat. He had a reedy, thin voice. June came to the door, wiping her flour-dusted hands on her apron. She did not open it all the way. "Can I help you?" "My apologies for the intrusion. My name is Smith, John Smith. I'm afraid my mule has cast a shoe, and I saw your smoke. I was wondering if I might impose upon you for a drink of water. And perhaps, do you have any eggs to sell? I'm powerfully hungry." June looked at him. His story was plausible. His mule was, indeed, limping, but something was wrong. His suit was dusty, but his boots were too new. And his eyes were not on her. They were in the cabin. She saw them flick to the fireplace. They scanned the small room, noting the 2 mugs by the water barrel, the pair of large, mended men's boots by the door, the fresh stack of firewood that was too large for a woman to have cut. "I don't have eggs to spare," June said, her voice cold. "And the water is in the barrel by the barn. You can help yourself." "Ah, you're too kind," the man said, still smiling. He swung down from the mule. He was small, but he moved with a quick, wiry grace. He walked past her, toward the barn. "A fine-looking repair on that roof. Ma'am, must have been hard work." June said nothing. She watched him. From the dark, shadowed interior of the barn, Eli watched him, too. He had heard the voice. He stood in the deepest stall, the newly sharpened axe in his hand. He watched the man. He did not recognize him. He was not one of Hatcher's men. He was something else, a tracker. Maybe a bounty man. The man, Smith, went to the water barrel. He drank, slowly, his eyes scanning the barn, the fresh hoof prints, the size of the axe cuts in the new wood. He saw Eli's bedroll, tucked in the hayloft. He turned back to June, who was still standing at the cabin door, a statue of distrust. "God bless you for the water, ma'am. I'll be on my way. He hesitated, looking back at the cabin. "It's a lonely place. A woman alone. You must be very strong." "I am," June said. The man smiled again. "I'm sure you are. Good day." He led his limping mule back down the path and disappeared. June came into the barn. Eli was still standing in the shadow, his knuckles white around the axe handle. "Did you see him?" June asked, her voice a low whisper. "I saw him," Eli said. His face was granite. "He was snooping. He said his name was Smith. He was lying." "Everyone lies," Eli said. He put the axe down. "Lock the door tonight, and put the bar across it." "Eli, you're frightening me." "Good," he said. "Be frightened." That night, the tension in the cabin was so thick, June felt she could have cut it with a knife. They ate in silence. Every gust of wind, every creak of the cabin, made them both jump. June went to bed, but she did not sleep. Eli did not come to bed. He sat at the table in the dark, his rifle across his knees. Around midnight, he stood. He checked his gun. He slipped his knife into his boot. "Where are you going?" June's voice came from the darkness, small and terrified. "He didn't go far. His mule is lame. He'll have made a cold camp. He's waiting to see who else is here. He's waiting for me." "Eli, no, don't go. It's not your fight." He turned, a shadow against the dying embers. "He came here, June. He put his eyes on your home. That makes it my fight." He was gone before she could say another word, slipping out the door like a ghost. Eli was right. The man was camped 2 miles down the valley, in a small, sheltered box canyon. He had not even built a fire. He was a professional. He was sitting, wrapped in a blanket, his back to a rock, watching the trail. He never heard Eli. One moment, he was alone, chewing on a piece of hardtack. The next, a boot kicked his rifle away from his hand, and the cold, sharp point of a knife was at his throat. "Don't move," Eli's voice said, a whisper in the dark. The man, Smith, froze. His eyes were wide, white circles in the moonlight. He could feel the pinprick of the knife, just enough to draw a single, warm drop of blood. Who are you?" he stammered. "I'm the man you're looking for," Eli said. He pressed the knife harder. "Who sent you?" "Nobody. I'm just a traveler." Eli's fist, hard as a rock, hit the man in the stomach. The man gagged, curling in on himself, but the knife at his throat stopped him. "I'll ask you one more time," Eli whispered, his voice deadly calm. "Who sent you?" "Hatcher!" the man wheezed, the truth spilling out in a rush of panic. "Hatcher, from the bar T. He's put a bounty out. $500 for a horse thief. Eli, something. He said you'd be headed north. He said you were." "I know what he said." Eli eased the knife. "Just a fraction. And you came to a lone woman's cabin to collect—" I heard talk in town about the widow, about a man. I was just looking—" "You found him." Eli leaned in, his face inches from the terrified man's. "Now, here's what's going to happen. You're going to get on your mule. You're going to ride south. You're not going to stop. You're not going to look back. You're going to tell Hatcher, and anyone else who asks, that you found nothing. You're going to tell them the trail is cold, and the man who was here is a ghost. Do you understand me?" "Yes," the man squeaked. "Because if you come back," Eli said, his voice dropping to a near inaudible hiss, "or if you send anyone else, I won't be in the mood to talk. I will find you, and I will gut you like a fish. I will leave you for the wolves. Am I clear?" "Yes, God, yes." Eli stood, pulling the knife back. He kicked the man's rifle, sending it scattering into the rocks. "Leave the gun. Go." The man scrambled to his feet, grabbed his mule's reins, and, in a clumsy, terrified rush, hauled himself into the saddle. He kicked the lame animal, and it trotted, stumbling, into the darkness. Eli stood, watching him go. He was shaking, not from cold, from the rage, the old, familiar, killing rage. He had come so close. He came back to the cabin just before dawn. June was at the table, a shawl wrapped around her, her face pale. She had not slept. He walked in, put the knife on the table, and sat. He poured a cup of cold coffee and drank it in one gulp. "He's gone," Eli said. "Who was he?" June asked. "Who is Hatcher?" Eli looked at his hands. They were steady. "The man who sent him, the man I worked for, the man I told you I killed for." "You told me that was a saloon fight." "I lied," he said. He looked up at her, his eyes hollow. I lied." June sat across from him. The cabin was gray with the coming dawn. "Then tell me," she said, her voice quiet but hard. "No more lies. I deserve to know. What are you running from, Eli?" He looked at her, at this woman who had seen his scars, who had held him in his nightmares, who had faced down her own demons in this very room. She deserved it. "Hatcher," he began, and the story spilled out. Not the clean version, the real one. "He's not just a rancher. He's a thief. He runs a gang. We stole government cattle. We did things. I was his foreman. I was good at it. I was a thief, and I was a killer. The man in the saloon. He wasn't the first. He was just the first one who I regretted." June's face was still. She did not flinch. "I found out he was doing more," Eli continued, his voice low, his eyes on the past. He was going to kill a family, settlers. They'd seen too much. They'd seen him rebrand stock. He was going to make it look like an Indian raid, a man, his wife, and his two kids. He stopped. The cabin was silent. I couldn't," he whispered. "I've done things, but that I warned them. I told them to run, and they did. But Hatcher found out. He found out I was the one. He betrayed me. He framed me for horse stealing. He tried to have me killed. The men who shot me, they weren't law. They were Hatcher's men. They're not hunting me to bring me to justice. June, they're hunting me to silence me, because I know all of it. I'm the only one left who knows where all the bodies are buried. He finally looked at her. He had given her his confession. He had shown her the full, ugly, rotten core of himself. He was not a noble victim. He was a criminal who had, for one single moment, found a conscience, and it had cost him everything. "So you see," he said, his voice empty, "I'm not just trouble. I'm a plague. And that man, the tracker, he'll go back. He'll tell Hatcher he found me, or Hatcher will just send more. They will never stop. And when they come..." He stood up. He walked to the alcove and picked up the satchel he had dropped weeks ago. He began to put his few things in it, his spare shirt, his shaving razor, the box of bullets. "When they come," he said, his back to her. "They won't care who's standing next to me. They'll clean the slate. They'll burn this cabin to the ground, with you in it. And they'll say the horse thief did it, resisting arrest." He turned, the satchel in his hand. His face was a mask of grief. "I have to go. It's the only way. I have to keep you safe." He was leaving. He was doing the right thing. He was doing the one noble, terrible thing he could do. He was taking his plague away from her door. June stood up. She did not cry. She did not plead. She looked at him. The man she had pulled from the mud. The man she had loved in the dark. "No," she said. He stopped, his hand on the door latch. "June, you don't understand." "I understand perfectly," she said, her voice clear and cold. "This man, Hatcher, he's the one who had my husband hanged. He's the one who spread the rumors. He's the one who tried to buy my land for nothing. He's the one who sent those men to spit on my dress." Eli stared at her. The blood drained from his face. "What?" "Hatcher. He runs this valley. He runs the sheriff. He runs the bank. He runs the gossip. He's the man who took my son. Not directly, but his kind. The men with money and no conscience. The men who think they own the world." She walked toward him. "You think you're a plague? I've been living with his plague for 2 years. I've been running, just like you. I've been hiding in this cabin, pretending the world wasn't there, pretending I was already dead." She was in front of him now. She put her hand on his chest. "I'm not afraid of ghosts. Eli, I've been sleeping with them." "June," he said, his voice breaking. I can't be the man who gets you killed." "And I," she said, her eyes fierce, "won't be the woman who lets you die alone in a gully. You're not leaving. You can't stop me." "I know." He tried to step around her. He had to. It was the only way. She blocked him. She put her hands on his shoulders. He was stronger. He could move her. He tried. "Don't," she said, her voice a low command. He pushed, gently. "June, get out of my way." "No." He tried again, and she stumbled, but she was set. She was a stone. She was a mountain. "If you walk out that door," she said, her voice low, trembling with a force that was stronger than his, "you are not just leaving this bed. You are not just leaving this cabin." She pushed him back toward the bed. He was so surprised, he stumbled. "You're leaving me." She pushed him again, hard. He fell, sitting on the edge of the bed, the satchel dropping from his hand. She was on him, in a fluid, fierce, angry motion. She straddled him, just as she had before, her knees on either side of his hips, her hands on his shoulders, pushing him back. But this was not to hold him down. This was not playful or desperate. This was a claim. This was a war. "You are not leaving me," she whispered, her face inches from his. Her hair, which she hadn't even bothered to pin up, fell around them. He stared up at her, this wild, angry, beautiful woman. He saw the tears in her eyes, but they were not tears of sadness. They were tears of rage. "They will come," he whispered, his hands coming up to grip her waist. "And we," she said, "will be here." She leaned in, and she kissed him. It was not a kiss of comfort. It was a kiss of defiance. It was a kiss that said, "We are alive." It was a kiss that said, "Damn them." He kissed her back. He pulled her down, his hands tangling in her hair, his arms wrapping around her, rolling so that he was on top of her. They were a tangle of limbs, and anger, and fear, and a love that was so raw and so real. It burned. They spent the night in defiance. It was not a gentle lovemaking. It was raw. It was passionate. It was two people on the edge of a cliff, clinging to each other. It was a fight against the world. It was a desperate, tender, beautiful thing. They memorized each other's scars. They whispered each other's names in the dark. They made love as if it were the last act of their lives. A final, beautiful testament to the fact that they had been here, and they had been real, and they had, for a short, stolen time, been loved. They fell asleep, tangled in each other, just as the first, thin, gray light of dawn began to creep into the cabin. They slept for an hour, a deep, exhausted sleep. The peace of the morning was shattered by a single, sharp sound. A gunshot. It rang out, echoing off the hills. It was close. Eli was out of the bed, his gun in his hand, before his eyes were even fully open. He moved to the window, peering out a crack in the frame. June was right behind him, pulling her dress on, her hands shaking. "They're here," Eli said, his voice flat. In the gray light, he could see them. 3 riders, sitting at the edge of the tree line, not moving, just watching. The siege had begun. The small cabin, once a shelter, became a prison, then a fortress. The 3 riders did not move. They sat on their horses, black silhouettes against the gray, bleeding dawn, a silent, patient promise of violence. "Hatcher's men," Eli said, his voice flat. He was already moving, his actions economical, born of long, terrible practice. "That's Frank, the big one, and the one with the yellow slicker. That's Pike. They're his best. They're not here to talk." June's heart was a cold, heavy stone. The night of passion, of defiance, felt 1,000 miles away. This was the cost. "What do we do?" "We survive," he said. "Bar the door. Put the shutter on your window. They'll try the front first, to test us. And then, Eli said, checking the load in his rifle, "we show them they made a mistake." June did not hide. She did not weep. She went to the cedar chest at the foot of her bed. It was the one thing that had survived the small fire that had damaged the roof. She opened it. Beneath her winter wools, wrapped in oilcloth, was Jonathan's rifle. It was a heavy, older model, a Sharps, but she had kept it clean, the way he had taught her. "I know how to use it," she said, her voice quiet. Eli looked at her. Her hair was wild, her face pale, and the scar on her temple from the last attack was a faint, white line. He had never loved her more. "Take the side window. It's the only one with an angle on the barn. They'll try to use it for cover. Don't shoot, not unless I do. Just be ready." The first shot came an hour later, as the sun began to warm the air. It wasn't aimed at the cabin. It hit the water barrel, splitting the wood. The sound was a loud crack, followed by the gush of their water supply, staining the dirt. A voice, rough and loud, cut through the quiet. "Eli Lonergan, we know you're in there. Hatcher's given us $500 for your hide. He don't care if it's warm or cold. Come on out, and send the woman out first. unless you want her wearing the same holes you are." Eli stayed low, his back against the wall.
"They're trying to draw us. They want to see where we're posted."
June was at her window, the heavy rifle resting on the sill. Her hands were sweating, but they did not shake. Another shot. This one slammed into the front door, the thwack of the lead ball vibrating through the wood. "They're splitting up," Eli whispered, peering through a small chink in the logs. "Frank's moving toward the barn."
"I see him,"
June whispered back. She had the heavy rifle centered on the man's chest.
"Do I—"
"Not yet. Wait." The silence stretched. It was a terrible, nerve-shredding thing. The only sound was the wind and the far-off call of a hawk, a sound that, until yesterday, had meant peace. Then, the attack came, a sudden, deafening volley of gunfire. They were shooting at the front door, the side window, trying to pin them. Glass shattered. Wood splintered. "Now," Eli yelled. He fired. June fired. The boom of her Sharps rifle was deafening, filling the small cabin with acrid, blue smoke. A yell from outside. She'd hit something.
"You shot Pike!"
Frank's voice was a roar of rage.
"You bitch!"
The shooting became frantic, a desperate, angry firefight. Bullets tore through the small cabin. A tin pot on the stove exploded, sending fragments flying. June reloaded, her movement stiff, but she did it. She fired again. The air grew thick with smoke and fear. They were holding. They were alive. Then, a new smell. A terrible smell. "Smoke," June said, her throat tight. Eli moved to the back, to a small peephole he'd drilled. "The barn. They've lit the barn." June's blood ran cold.
"Silas, the mule, he was in there."
She heard a single, terrified bray, cut short. A sob tore from her throat. "They're trying to burn us out," Eli said, his voice grim. The wind was picking up, blowing the flames and sparks from the barn directly toward the cabin. "It's a trap. They want us to run. They'll pick us off when we bolt." The heat was already growing. Sparks, thick as fireflies, began to land on the dry, wooden roof of the cabin. "The roof will go first," Eli said. We can't stay." A bullet sang through the air, past the window June had just left. She felt a sudden, sharp sting on her arm. She looked down. Blood, a deep, long graze, torn through her sleeve, beads of red welling up. "I'm hit," she said, her voice numb with shock. Eli was at her side in a second. He tore her sleeve. It was ugly, but it wasn't deep. "It's a graze. You'll live. If we get out of here." The roof was smoking. The cabin was filling with a hazy, choking cloud.
"The root cellar,"
June said, coughing.
"The hatch is on the outside, on the north side, away from the fire."
"They'll be waiting for us."
"There are traps,"
June said, her eyes meeting his.
"Jonathan, he set traps for bears. After one got the chickens, they're still there, by the north fence.
I never moved them." Eli looked at her. "Show me." They crawled, staying low. The cabin was an oven. The fire was on the roof now. A low, terrible roaring sound. They reached the back wall, where a small, rough-hewn door led to the shallow root cellar. It was their only way. Eli kicked it open. Go! Stay low! When you get out of the hatch, don't run. Crawl to the creek bed. Don't stop. I'll be right behind you. I'll draw their fire."
"No, Eli."
"Go!" he roared. She went. The cellar was dark, cool, and smelled of damp earth and potatoes. She scrambled on her hands and knees to the outside hatch. A slanted, wooden door. She pushed it. It was heavy. She burst out into the smoky air. The world was fire and noise. She crawled, her wounded arm dragging, toward the creek. A shout.
"There she is! She's running!"
A gunshot. The bullet kicked up dirt just inches from her face. She screamed. "Hey!" Eli's voice. He had come out of the cellar, but he hadn't run. He was standing, his rifle at his shoulder. A perfect target. "Over here, you sons of bitches!" He fired. One of the men, Pike, the one June had hit, fell back. The other man, Frank, turned, surprised. He raised his rifle. And then, a sound, a scream, a high, terrified sound, followed by the wet, metallic snap of a spring. Frank, in his haste to get a clear shot at Eli, had backed up. He had backed up right into the tall grass by the north fence, right into Jonathan's trap. The bear trap's teeth, rusty and immense, had closed on his leg. He was screaming, a terrible bubbling sound. Pike, the last man, saw his partner down. He saw Eli, a dark angel in the smoke. He saw June, who had reached the creek bed and was now aiming her own rifle, her face a mask of blood and soot. It was too much. This was not a $500 job. This was a hornet's nest. He scrambled to his horse, firing one last, wild shot, and he rode. He did not look back. Silence. The silence was absolute, broken only by the crackle of the burning cabin and the horrific, gasping sobs of the man in the trap. Eli walked over, his rifle aimed at the man's chest. The man, Frank, was clawing at the steel jaws, his leg a ruin of blood and bone. "Please," the man wept. "God, please, get it off me!" Eli just stared at him, his face hard, his eyes cold. He raised the rifle. "Eli, no." June was there, her hand on his arm. "Don't, it's over." He looked at her. He looked at the burning ruin of their home. He looked at the weeping man. He lowered the gun. "It's never over," he whispered. They heard the horses then, a lot of them, coming fast. Eli raised his rifle again, pulling June behind him. It was Sheriff Brody and a posse of 6 men, their guns drawn. They must have seen the smoke from town. Brody took in the scene, the burned-out cabin, the dead horse, the dead man, Pike lying near the barn, the man in the trap, still screaming, and Eli and June standing in the middle of it all, covered in blood and ash, 2 guns in their hands. Brody's eyes narrowed. He looked at Eli. "You're a hard man to find. Lonergan." "It was self-defense. Sheriff," June said, her voice shaking. "They attacked us. They tried to burn us alive." "All I see," Brody said, spitting on the ground, "is one dead man, well, he ain't long for this world, and a wanted fugitive. Eli Lonergan, standing over them. That's murder, in my book." You let Hatcher," the man in the trap gurgled. "You told us they'd be easy." Brody's face went dark. He rode over and kicked the man, hard, in the side. "Shut your mouth." He turned back to Eli. "You've caused a lot of trouble, boy." He looked at June, his gaze filled with contempt. "And you, ma'am. Harboring, lying to the law. Will, the town ain't gonna stand for this. You're both under suspicion. You're both a sickness in this valley." He looked at the dead man, and the man in the trap. He looked at the burned-out homestead. "I'm taking him in," he said, gesturing at the trapped man. "But you," he pointed at Eli, "you're poison. I'm warning you. This is on you. All of it." He and his posse cut the man from the trap, slung him over a horse, and rode off, leaving Eli and June alone in the ruins. They didn't even bother to take the dead man. The town, which had whispered, now howled. Brody's story was the one that stuck. He had ridden out to find a den of iniquity. He'd found the widow, shacked up with her killer lover, in a firefight that had gone bad. The townspeople, eager to believe the worst, turned on June with a righteous, cold fury. She was not a widow. She was a whore. She was not a victim. She was a murderer. She had harbored a criminal. She had defied the natural order. She had corrupted the morality of the whole valley. When she walked into town, forced to buy a tent and tools, They refused her. Henderson, the storekeep, barred his own door. "We don't serve your kind."
Mrs.
Brody spat on the walk in front of her.
God will judge you.
They lived in the root cellar, a dark, damp hole in the ground. They buried Pike. They ate rabbits Eli snared. They were pariahs. Then the final blow. A polished black carriage, drawn by 2 fine horses, rolled up the path. It stopped. 2 people got out. A woman in a black silk dress, her face a mask of cold judgment, and a man in a stiff suit, carrying a leather bag. It was her sister-in-law, Agatha, and her husband, the lawyer. They did not come to the root cellar. They stood by the ruins of the cabin, their noses wrinkled, as if at a bad smell. They sent word. They were staying at the hotel in town, and they were filing a petition. The hearing was held in the saloon, the only building large enough. The entire town was there. It was a spectacle. Judge Hemlock, a traveling circuit judge, presided. He was an old man with weary eyes who had seen too much. June stood alone. Eli was in hiding, in the hills. He had wanted to come. She had forbidden it. "You will hang," she'd said. "This is my fight." Her brother-in-law, the lawyer, was smooth. He was eloquent. He painted a picture of a tragic, fallen woman. "A grieving widow," he said, his voice dripping with false sympathy, "who, we fear, has lost her mind. She became a recluse. She refused our help, our offers of a good, clean life back east." He pointed a finger at June.
And then she fell into the sway of a known criminal, a killer. She lived in sin with this man. She harbored him. She fought alongside him in a gun battle that destroyed my brother's legacy, this very land.
The townspeople murmured, "Yes, yes, that's what happened." "Your Honor, she is mentally unstable. She is a moral danger. We, as her only family, ask the court to grant us custody of this land, so we may redeem it, and we ask that she be declared unfit for her own good." The judge looked at June. She was pale. Her dress was clean but mended, and the scar on her temple was a vivid, angry red. She looked broken. The judge's face was sympathetic, but he was leaning. This was a clear-cut case. "Mrs. Talbot," he said, his voice gentle, "this is a terrible tragedy. These accusations, they are severe. Do you have anyone, to speak for you?" June looked around, at Sheriff Brody, his face a smirk, at Mrs. Hatcher, watching from the back, her face triumphant, at her in-laws, their faces like vultures. She was alone. She stood. "It is my land," she said, her voice a hoarse whisper. "Jonathan and I, we worked it. It is
ruined,"
her sister-in-law snapped. "I see no reason to prolong this," the judge said, sighing. "The evidence is overwhelming. I am inclined to agree with the petition." "No." The saloon door swung open. Eli Lonergan stood there. He was clean-shaven, his hair slicked back. He wore his only clean shirt. He looked powerful. "Eli, no!" June cried. Sheriff Brody stood, his hand on his gun. "I told you."
"Silence," the judge roared. "Let the man speak. Who are you?"
"My name is Eli Lonergan," he said, his voice filling the room. He walked, not to June, but to the judge. "And I am the man. I am the killer. I am the thief. And I am the liar." The room was silent. "But she," he said, turning and pointing at June, "this woman is not unstable. She is the sanest person in this valley. She is not a whore. She is the only decent thing I have ever known. And you," he turned to the crowd. "You, and you," he pointed at Brody. "And you," he pointed at Hatcher, who was now pale. "You are the ones who are sick." "Your Honor," Eli said, turning back to the judge, I am a wanted man, but not for what they say. I worked for Mr. Hatcher. I was his foreman, and I will confess, to everything, to the cattle thieving, to the men I've hurt. I'll testify. I'll tell you where Hatcher's bodies are buried. I'll tell you about the settlers he tried to have me kill. Hatcher was on his feet.
This is an outrage. He's a liar.
I am, Eli agreed. But I'm not lying now. I'll give you all of it. But you will not take this land from her. She saved my life. She fought for her home. She has bled for that land. In a way these vultures will never understand. Take me, hang me, but you give her back her land. He stood there, his confession hanging in the air. He had just signed his own death warrant. The judge was staring at him. He was no longer weary. He was intrigued. This, a small voice piped up from the back. A rancher, a Mr. Davies, was pushing his way forward. Your Honor, I got this, a letter, from Colorado. From the settlers, the ones he mentioned. He handed a worn, folded piece of paper to the judge. They said Eli, he saved them. He warned them. He saved their children. They told me to show it if he was ever in trouble. The judge read the letter. His face, which had been hard, softened. He looked up, over his spectacles. He looked at Eli. He looked at June, who was now weeping, silent tears streaming down her face. He looked at Hatcher, who was sweating. He looked at the in-laws, their faces pinched with greed. He banged his gavel. This petition is a farce, he boomed. It is born of greed and malice. It is dismissed. The land belongs to Mrs. June Talbot, now and forever. The in-laws shrieked. However, the judge said, holding up a hand. He looked at Eli. We have a problem. You, son, you have confessed, in open court, to a great many things, and Mr. Hatcher, he owns this county, this letter. It saves your soul, but it won't save your neck. Not here. I'll face the trial, Eli said, his voice quiet. He looked at June. You'll hang, the judge said bluntly. Brody will see to it. Hatcher will see to it. No, this letter, and your honesty, they buy you one thing, a chance. Sir, I am giving you 1 week. Mr. Lonergan, 7 days. You are to be out of this territory. If you are found in this territory after 7 days, I will have no choice but to issue a warrant. Sheriff Brody will arrest you. I will try you, and you will hang. Do you understand me? Eli looked at June. They had won, and they had lost. I understand, Eli said. Then this court is adjourned. June walked out of the saloon. The owner of her land, the townspeople parted for her. They did not speak. They did not congratulate her. They glared. She had won, but she had won with the testimony of a killer. She was still, in their eyes, unclean. Her name was cleared on paper, but in the valley, it was scorned. She and Eli stood on the boardwalk, in the harsh, unforgiving sunlight, completely, utterly alone. They had 7 days, 1 week, 168 hours. It was a lifetime, and it was no time at all. They walked back to the root cellar, the town's cold, hateful silence at their backs. They did not speak. There was nothing to say. They had won, and the price of their victory was separation. The first day was spent in a daze. They salvaged what they could from the fire. The iron stove, cracked but usable. A few blackened pots. The metal bed frame, warped and twisted, which Eli hauled out of the ashes and began, with a grim determination, to hammer straight. They were acting. They were moving. Because to stop moving was to think, and to think was to feel the true, crushing weight of the 7-day deadline. They were tender with each other, with a desperate, fragile gentleness. Every touch was a goodbye. When she handed him the hammer, her fingers lingered on his. When he came in from scavenging, he would touch her hair, a silent, aching gesture. June helped him pack. It was a mockery. He had nothing, a satchel, a shirt, which she mended again, her stitches tiny and perfect, as if the care she put into the thread could somehow keep him safe. A handful of bullets, the small bag of salt she had bought in town.
"You'll need this," she said, her voice rough. "June," he started, his voice thick.
"Don't," she said, not looking up from her sewing.
Don't speak of it. Not yet. We have 6 days."
But the days bled away, one into the next. Each sunset a small death. They worked. They began to rebuild the cabin, a foolish, hopeful, heartbreaking task. Eli cut new logs, squaring them with the axe. June cleared the rubble, her hands raw. They were building a home they would not share. They were acting out a future that had been stolen from them. Their nights were a different kind of agony. They lay in the damp, cold root cellar, on a bed of blankets, their bodies pressed together. They did not make love. It was too close to grief. They just held each other. A silent, desperate clinging. They would lie awake, listening to each other breathe in the dark, memorizing the sound. One night, she wept. She did not sob. It was a quiet, hopeless, steady stream of tears that soaked his shoulder. He just held her, his own eyes squeezed shut, his heart a cold, hard knot in his chest.
"I can't,"
she whispered.
I can't go back to being alone."
"I'll come back," he said, the words a lie, a prayer. "When it's safe, when he's gone. He'll never be gone. His kind is never gone. I'll find a way," he promised, kissing her hair, his throat raw. "I swear it. I'll find a way." On the last morning, the 7th day, the air was cold and sharp. Winter was not coming. It was here. A thin, hard frost covered the blackened earth, making the ruins of their home look like a skeleton dusted with sugar. Eli had the mule. Silas, saddled. The mule had survived. Having been in the far pasture, away from the barn, Eli had bought him from June. With the last of his money, the $20 he had saved from his time at the bar tea.
He's a stubborn fool,"
June said, her voice trembling as she stroked the mule's nose. "We'll get on fine, then," Eli said.
He had his satchel, he had his rifle, he had his coat. He was the same man who had staggered, bleeding, into her life. But he was not. He was leaving his heart in this cold, dark hole in the ground.
He turned to her. The goodbye was unbearable. They stood in the frozen morning, the world silent, and just looked. They were memorizing each other. The way her hair, pulled back, showed the strong line of her jaw. The way his eyes, so blue, were dark with a pain that mirrored her own.
"June,"
he said. He had no other words. She did not cry. She was beyond tears. She stepped forward, put her cold, chapped hands on his face, and pulled him down. She kissed him. It was not a kiss of passion. It was a kiss of sealing. It was a brand. It was a promise of a life that should have been. It was salt and cold and a desperate final, breaking hope.
You stay alive, Eli Lonergan?"
she whispered, her forehead pressed against his. "Only if you do," he whispered back. He couldn't do it. He couldn't leave. He pulled her to him, his arms a steel band, and he held her, breathing in her scent, the smell of wood smoke and lye soap, and the good, clean smell of her. "I love you," he said. The words tore from him, a confession more final than the one in the courtroom.
"I know,"
she breathed.
"I love you."
He had to. He pushed her away, gently. He swung up onto the mule. The animal, sensing the grief, shifted uneasily. Eli looked down at her, a small, strong, lonely figure in a world of ash. He turned the mule. He did not look back. He couldn't. He kicked the animal, and it began the slow, plodding walk south, toward the ridge. June stood. She did not move. She wrapped her arms around herself, her hands clutching the sleeves of her thin dress. She watched him. She watched him grow smaller. She watched him until he was just a speck, a dark shape against the rising sun. She watched him as he reached the top of the ridge. He stopped. He sat there, a silhouette. For a long, agonizing minute, he was looking back, and then he was gone. She stared after him, at the empty space where he had been. She stood there, barely breathing, as the sun rose higher, as the frost began to melt. She stood there until her feet were numb and her heart was a hollow, aching void. He was gone. The weeks that followed were a gray, colorless blur. June moved from the root cellar. She had to. The cold was too deep. She began to rebuild. She worked with a frantic, desperate energy. She salvaged the logs Eli had cut. She found a neighbor, the old man she'd sold the goats to, and he, in a rare act of kindness, came and helped her raise a new, smaller, one-room cabin just before the first real snow. He did not speak of Eli. He just helped. She was alone, but it was a different kind of alone. Before Eli, it had been a numbing, empty loneliness. Now, it was an active, aching loneliness. The cabin was too quiet. The bed was too cold. The silence was filled with his absence. She wrote. She had no one to send the letters to. She wrote to him. In a new ledger, she told him about the cabin. She told him about the snow. She told him that she had seen a wolf, and she had not been afraid. She told him she was healing. She dreamed of him every night. She dreamed he was there, by the fire, his hands whittling. She dreamed of his kiss. She dreamed of the firefight, of the trial, of the look on his face when he'd confessed. She would wake up, her heart pounding, reaching for him in the empty, cold bed. She was a pariah. The town did not forget, and it did not forgive. When she went for supplies, they served her, but with a cold, grudging silence. She was the woman who had loved a killer. She was the woman who had won. They hated her for it. She didn't care. She had faced down Hatcher's lawyers. She had faced down his gunmen. She would face down their silence. She was, as Eli had said, the only decent thing in the valley, and she would hold on to that. Just after the new year, when the snow was 3 feet deep and the world was a silent, white expanse. She made the trek to town. There was a letter. Her heart stopped. It was not from her in-laws. It was a dirty, beaten-up envelope, with her name scrawled on it. It had been forwarded, and forwarded again. It was postmarked from a small mining town in Colorado. She waited. She did not open it in the store. She did not open it in the wagon. She held it, a hot, impossible thing, in her mitten all the way home. She sat in her new, small cabin. Her hands were shaking so badly, she could barely break the seal. She unfolded the single, cheap piece of paper. The handwriting was rough, the pencil barely legible. It was 3 words. Still breathing, still yours. She read it. She read it again and again. She clutched the paper to her chest and she laughed. She sat alone in her cabin, in the middle of a frozen wasteland, and she laughed, the tears streaming down her face. He was alive. He was hers. A season changed. The world turned. The deep snow, which had seemed eternal, began to recede. The hard, gray ice on the creek cracked, and the sound of running water returned to the valley. The prairie, which had been brown and dead, began to show the faintest, impossible hint of green. June had changed, too. The winter had been hard, but it had not broken her. She was leaner, her face weathered, but her eyes were clear. She had survived. She had rebuilt. She was, for the first time in her life, entirely her own. She was no longer Jonathan's widow, or Thomas's grieving mother, or Eli's lover. She was June, and she was enough. One morning, in the late, glorious warmth of spring, she was outside, digging in the small patch of earth that had once been her garden. She was going to plant again. She was going to bring life back. She heard a sound, a single horse, not a mule, a horse. She shaded her eyes, her heart a slow, heavy beat. A figure was riding up the path. He was not a neighbor. He was not a peddler. He was dirtier than she'd ever seen him. His clothes were in rags. He was leaner, gaunt, his face all sharp angles and beard. But it was him. His eyes, even from a distance, were the same. They were fixed on her. He rode up, not to the cabin, but to her. He stopped. He just sat on the horse, looking down at her. He looked like a man who had been to hell and back. He stepped down from the horse. It was a good horse, a fine-looking bay, but it was exhausted. He stood in front of her. Neither of them moved. The silence was a living thing. I got a job, he said, his voice a dry rasp, as if he hadn't used it in months. In Colorado, mining. I bought a horse. I testified against Hatcher's men, the ones in Colorado. Put a few of them away. The judge, the one who wrote the letter, he spoke for me. Eli, she breathed. He took a step closer. He was shaking. I told them everything. The letter, it cleared my name. Mostly, they said I was free to go. They said I'd served my time, but Hatcher, he's still out here. Brody's still out here. I'm still trouble. He looked at the new cabin. He looked at her. He looked at the hard, unforgiving land. I'm still not a good man. June, I'm still what I am, but I'm done running. He stood there, offering her the broken, mended pieces of himself. If you still want me, he said, his voice breaking, I'm done running. June didn't answer with words. She closed the distance between them. She didn't weep. She didn't smile. She was a woman claiming her own. She grabbed the front of his ruined shirt. She pulled him to her. She kissed him. It was not a kiss of tears. It was a kiss of earth and sun and spring. It was a kiss of hunger and homecoming and a love that had survived a winter. It was hard, and it was real. She pushed him. She pushed him toward the new cabin. He stumbled, laughing, a rusty, broken, beautiful sound. June. She pushed him again, through the door he had helped her build, into the home she had kept for him. She pushed him toward the bed, the metal frame he had hammered straight. He fell back onto it, his hat falling to the floor. He lay there, looking up at her. This miracle, this woman who had once again saved his life. She stood over him, her silhouette dark against the bright, open door. You're not healed, she said. A slow, wide, glorious smile broke across his face, and she, smiling back, climbed on top of him, full of love and hunger, and a homecoming that was more real than any place he had ever known. They rebuilt. It was slow. It was hard. There was pain. They woke, some nights, from nightmares. The town did not relent. The townspeople still whispered, Hatcher, though his power was diminished by Eli's testimony, was still a shadow on the horizon. The world was still cruel, but it was a different life. It was a life chosen. They rebuilt the cabin, room by room. He dug a new well, the water clean and cold. She planted a garden, and this time the corn grew tall. They bought new goats. They lived. They were not the bright, unbroken people of stories. They were scarred. They were bent, but they were not broken. The story ends, but they do not. You can still see them. On the long, cool evenings, After the work is done, they are sitting on the porch of the new cabin. The land is hard, and the world is not kind, but they are sitting, and they are watching the horizon, their fingers laced. Two broken people who had carved out a life that no one, not even themselves, had ever believed they deserved. Thank you so much for listening to our story. We would be honored if you'd let us know where in the world you're listening from. Please comment and say hello. If you enjoyed this, please consider subscribing to From Wild West. And we'd love for you to share your thoughts in English.